Hello, and thank you for joining us today to discuss perhaps one of the more unattractive components of our endeavors in landscape, dealing with the waste. I'm Nikki Springer. I've been an AIB advisor for several years and have had the pleasure of visiting and working with many of our program communities. I hold a PhD in environmental management from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and a Master of Landscape Architecture from the Harvard Graduate School of Design. I'm the former landscape facilities manager for Walmart's corporate headquarters, where I saw the maintenance and management of landscape, irrigation, erosion control, fencing, and snow removal services for the company's approximately 6,000 Walmart store, Sam's Club, and neighborhood market locations throughout the United States. And in a portfolio that big, as one can imagine, we generated a lot of landscape waste. So today we will cover landscape waste, what it is, why we care or should care about it, where it goes, the regulations that govern its fate, and ultimately how we can make less of it. Unfortunately, I'm not able to present this material live today, so I can't answer questions in real time, but Laura will be sending me any questions posed during the session, and I will provide written responses to be posted on the AIB website. So, next slide, please. Let's talk about landscape waste. The term landscape waste, also yard waste or green waste, typically refers to grass clippings, branches, hedge and plant trimmings, and other waste generated from the mowing, trimming, weeding, and other maintenance required to keep our landscapes healthy and looking presentable. Next slide. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, for the purposes of regulation and monitoring, specifically defines it as yard trimmings, including grass, leaves, tree and brush trimmings from residential, institutional, and commercial sources. It's important to note that this is not the same thing as organic waste, a term which also includes food and kitchen scraps. Next slide. And you might be surprised to know that the US EPA at the federal level pays attention to this form of household and commercial waste. But reason being, there's a lot of it. In 2018, the EPA estimated we generated 35.4 million tons of it, and that equated to more than 12% of our municipal solid waste. So getting a better handle on this form of waste and ultimately reducing that amount is something we all need to be a part of. This chart, pulled directly from the EPA website, shows that this form of waste is not going away anytime soon. It's continuing to increase in volume, but the fate is changing as we become more aware of its environmental impacts. So, next slide, please. Our next question, where does it go? Historically, it went to landfills, just like your regular household trash, but through awareness, regulation, and other programs, the EPA has been reducing the amount we send to landfills. And we are seeing an increase in composting, combustion, and importantly, not included with this EPA data, recycling. And this is a good thing. Next slide, please. You might ask, though, why not just throw it away? What's so bad about some leaves or branches ending up in a landfill? First, even though it is natural material, disposing of it in landfills can generate methane because the material is decomposing in an anaerobic environment, one without significant amounts of oxygen. This produces methane, a highly potent greenhouse gas that is then released into the atmosphere. Methane is estimated to be 80 times more potent in our atmosphere than carbon, which should cause us all to pay particular attention to our need to reduce it. We also need to be conscious of our landfill capacities. They are certainly not bottomless pits, and ensuring that the landfill diversion for other forms of waste is a critical component in managing our solid waste problem. In short, our landfills need to be saved for those waste streams that don't qualify for other options. Most of our yard waste is actually turned into mulch, and that also alleviates the need for non-waste material to be processed as mulch. And finally, it's actually often illegal to dispose of your yard waste in household trash. So we definitely want to avoid citations. Next slide, please. I want to touch a bit on landfill capacity, as it is important for all of us in our landscape design and management to understand the capacity issue. The banning of landscape waste has been a fairly straightforward and successful program by the EPA to better ensure that our landfill capacity is dedicated to appropriate waste streams. This was an effort started in the late 1980s and early 1990s and has been quite successful without too much controversy. And that's something that we can all feel good about. So now that we know that we can't throw it out with our trash, what should we do? And what do we do? Next slide, please. In most places in the United States, waste is bagged and collected separately from trash, sometimes on an entirely different day. Next. Most is shredded and dyed, either brown, black, or red, bagged and resold as mulch. And this is okay, but it still has an environmental impact. We need to be aware of the fuel consumption needed for the collection of yard waste and the energy required for mulch processing. Anything we can do to keep waste on site will reduce the fuel consumption, so composting of leaves and grass clippings can be a positive win. Next slide, please. When disposing of our yard waste, we all need to be sure to follow the specific instructions of our respective municipalities. And if you find in your community that the instructions can be hard to find or many residents are making mistakes, you might want to consider a public education campaign or posting or linking your AIB website to yard waste collection requirements to facilitate all residents being good neighbors. Next. For example, here are the instructions from the city of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The instructions provided are outlined for the residents, and these are easily found on Google. Next. If one is being mindful of reducing the need for hauling of yard waste, you might be tempted to take care of it in other ways, either by burning or dumping in natural areas, but this is not advisable and can actually be problematic. Dumping yard waste into natural areas can spread invasive species that a homeowner can be unaware of, or putting our ecosystems off balance and making it harder for native species to survive and thrive. Dumping large quantities can also change the habitat for local wildlife and hinder the growth of desirable underbrush, the small plants at the base of the forest floor. And lastly, please don't burn your yard waste. While it does eliminate waste from being hauled off site, this can lead to air pollution as fire releases particulate matter. And this can be damaging to both people and wildlife. And it can also create unsafe conditions if not properly controlled. Next. Let's discuss grass clippings specifically for a moment. Grass clippings are best left directly on the lawn by removing the bagging apparatus from a typical mower. This will evenly distribute the clippings, which will then decompose and act as a natural fertilizer and moisture retainer for your yard. Don't leave big piles in one place, though. This can lead to fungal growth and kill the grass in that area. You could also use grass clippings in garden beds as mulch. The only caveat here is for clippings that have been treated with pesticides or other chemicals. Be sure to follow the specific instructions for your treatment and consider bagging them if leaving the clippings on your lawn would leach harmful quantities of chemicals into the soil. Next. So now that we've covered the fate of yard waste, I want to switch gears for a bit and discuss strategies for reducing our overall yard waste in the first place. Many of these ideas are not new, but we often don't think specifically about reducing waste as a goal of the landscape design phase early in a project's life cycle. Next. I want to touch on 4 design and maintenance strategies that can ensure that our landscapes remain healthy and thus eliminate the need for premature plant stock replacements and minimize unnecessary landscape waste. Next. The first is for us to all plant appropriate plants. This means different things in different places and can take, unfortunately, some trial and error. But start by ensuring that plants are well suited to their environment, both at the regional level by looking at the zone numbers and other conditions, but also for the specific nuances of your site. Is it shady? Is it sunny? Are there particular threats or soil typologies? Is it a slope? Is it a flat area? What does the water look like? Native plants are typically a good bet, but so long as plants are not invasive and they're a good match for site conditions, they have a good chance of thriving, even if they're not native. I also want to encourage you to pay particular attention to the mature size of plants, and these can be very different from how it comes from the nursery, in some ways very surprisingly. This will ensure that there's appropriate spacing for root mass, distance from your house, your fence, or other structures, and also the anticipated maintenance needs over the life of the plant. These are all important things to consider to make sure that the plant you choose today remains in your yard or your landscape over many years. And also, I would encourage you to use perennials wherever you can. If eliminating the need to plant annuals every year in favor of plants with longer lifespans, this can really cut down on unnecessary landscape waste. Next. Keeping our plants healthy is the next step in extending their lives and reducing unnecessary waste. Developing a maintenance strategy in conjunction with a design proposal helps everyone to know what is required, and proactively protecting against known stressors is a good way to stay ahead of damage and infestation. I would encourage everyone to familiarize themselves with integrated pest management, sometimes abbreviated IPM, to manage pests. And to address our next step, minimizing chemicals. More is definitely not better. Too much fertilizer, herbicides, or pesticides can kill plants, and in addition, the runoff of these chemicals into our stormwater systems can cause eutrophication. Too much nutrients being released into water bodies, and this encourages the growth of algae and other harmful blooms, and this can create unhealthy conditions in our local water bodies and harm wildlife. Next slide. And finally, we need to irrigate our landscapes just right. This is started in the design phase by grouping plants together with similar water needs to make it easy to balance irrigation in different zones. I also want to encourage you to use drip irrigation systems where possible, as this both reduces the water loss to evaporation and to runoff, as the water is distributed directly into the soil, oftentimes under the mulch. You can also balance the timing of your irrigation such that if you do have a spray head, you're not evaporating unnecessary amounts of water during the heat of the day. Many municipalities actually have limitations on the timing of irrigation and prevent, for example, irrigation between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. There are also lots of relatively inexpensive options for moisture systems and weather trackers. This is colloquially called smart irrigation. And what this does is it helps ensure that automated irrigation is calibrated to changing conditions. So everyone knows that they don't like to see sprinklers operating in the rain, or that we're watering the sidewalk and all of that water is just running straight down into the storm drain. So this will help prevent those situations. And irrigation, just like everything else, needs both proactive and reactive maintenance. I would encourage you to inspect your systems on a routine basis and always monitor the consumption metrics on your utility bill, as this can often be the only indicator that you've got an underground line break or other type of leak. Ultimately, this is important because plants with too much or too little water are more vulnerable to infestation and thus have shortened lifespans. Next. That's the end of our waste reduction strategies. They're fairly simple and straightforward, but oftentimes we don't think of them specifically in terms of eliminating unnecessary waste. This slide includes some example programs pulled across different regions of the US and some state and city level examples in case your municipality is still working to develop a landscape waste program. Next slide. I've also included this slide referencing the Florida Friendly Landscape Principles. These are put out by the University of Florida Agricultural Extension School. And as a resident of Florida, I've reviewed each of these and find them to be helpful reminders of the topics that we've covered today. Most are universal and not tied to our specific landscape conditions in Florida, so I would encourage you to use them as a resource or to find a similar region-specific program for your area. We recorded this webinar in advance, so I can't take any questions in real time today, but please work with Laura to pose your questions, and I will provide written responses in the next few days. Laura will post them on our AIB website so they can be shared with everyone. Next slide. Thank you for joining me. This is a topic of both personal and professional importance to me, and I'm happy to share this interest and commitment with you. I hope we've covered some good information and helpful reminders about our shared responsibility in managing and reducing landscape waste, and I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback. Thanks so much. Have a great day.